I was going to say, you kind of threw me there because this is being posted on Thursday, but we recorded this on Wednesday night. So you said the World Series is starting tomorrow.
Right, because when it goes out on Thursday,
totally threw me for a second
cool.
there.
I didn't get to do that.
I am super excited for this. Firstly, as a Mets fan, because I do not have to watch another NL East team win a World Series this year. That's just, as a Met fan, I am very happy for that.
And we're thinking about the Phillies today, and Tyler Kepner, who I guess grew up watching the Phillies, was writing about the 10 worst moments in Phillies history. He had the game 7 as number 5. In the 10 worst moments in history. Number 1 was the 64 Phillies collapse, so it wasn't even a World Series. And so I started going back, so what about other World Series horrible losses? Well, the problem for the Phillies is that they've only won 2 World Series in 140 years. Okay, so we're going to do a deep dive on the Phillies actually very, very soon. And so the 2 World Series that they lost in 1915 and 1950, they lost 4 games to 1, and then 4 games to 0 to the Yankees in 1950. They weren't close. So there's no exciting, pivotal moments in that World Series or worst moments ever. So you had to wait all the way until 1964 to get your biggest and your first, since the founding of the franchise in 1883.
And I think, as much as we're going to talk about the Phillies, and I think what you can only call a collapse at home in those last 2 games, I think we have to start with congratulating both the Diamondbacks and the Rangers for advancing to the World Series.
Yeah, and nobody would have thunk it. We're included in that. Didn't think it. Didn't.
I will admit, I will eat some crow. I was proclaiming the Diamondbacks dead in the water after those first 2 games. I did not think they had a chance in that series.
And the Phillies led 2-0.
Commandingly.
3-2. Lost the last 2 games at home. Every chance they had was there, and
So let's start with the Phillies Diamondback series, because I think we've been discussing that, and the D-backs impressed me because more than anything else, that I did not think they had the pitching depth after Zach Gallen, because I did not think Merrill Kelly was going to be able to give them enough, and I didn't think they had anybody else that was going to be able to do it.
A guy like Brandon Pfaadt.
But then Merrill Kelly went out, and even though he lost game 2, he did pitch very well in that game, and then he was very good in game 6.
Well, and I said this last week, though. He pitched really well in game 2, and they lost 10-0. So I'm thinking, no matter how good you pitched,
you could have pitched that way. But then he pitched a lot better in game 6.
He pitched a lot better and gave them innings more than anything else, which took pressure off their bullpen, because I think, for a while, Torey Lovullo was being outmanaged by Rob Thompson, and then at the end of the series, it was the other way around.
One of the big adjustments is, I think it was in game 6, one of the announcers said, and the Diamondbacks are back to playing diamond-back baseball as they started running like crazy.
Why did it take them 6 games to do that?
I don't know why they waited so long, but you could immediately see the pressure it put on that Philly team that, oh, wow, if a guy gets on first base, he's basically on second.
And there came a point where they stopped even bothering to throw down there.
They were just running. Bases. Right.
Okay, you can have it.
And it's not like Realmuto's a bad defensive catcher. He's a Gold Glove winning defensive catcher. And it's interesting because they might be up against another Gold Glove winning catcher in
Jonah Heim
in the World Series. So it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be able to keep up that running that they were able to.
I think they have to. And before the season, obviously we thought when it came to the Rangers that they'd have Jacob deGrom and it'd be a different season than it was, but still a decent season, I think we felt. The Diamondbacks, like you said, we didn't really have a forecast to them, being...
We thought they would be a young team coming on the up and up. We thought they would be improving, maybe challenging for a wild card spot, but nowhere in a million years did we think, oh, yeah, they're going to be in the World Series this year.
But what they had to do was take advantage of the new rules, we said.
Yes.
And we knew they were a team that needed to run, and I don't think we could have forecast. We knew Corbin Carroll was going to be a good player even before the season.
I don't think anybody...
He was supposed to be Rookie of the Year, which he will be.
And he will be. But there's a lot of other guys on that team that have really stepped up. And, Ketel Marte had the series for his life. And I thought it was a very interesting move by Torey Lovullo in Game 7 to have Kettle lead off instead of Corbin Carroll.
Right, and Ketel Marte went, I think, 3 for 4. He won the series MVP, and basically was hitting the ball hard every single time.
And when we were watching the game last night, what I was saying is I think Torey Lovullo wanted Ketel Marte leading off because he helped set the tone for how he wanted the at-bats to go. And I think that was very important because I think there's a danger that with a guy like Corbin, you don't want to put your rookie out there and have him not give you that first at bat to set the tone in Game 7. And it worked.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, Corbin Carroll, who had done virtually nothing in the series, I think he was 3 for 23 before Game 7, and he went 3 for 4 in Game 7 with 2 stolen bases and 2 runs scored. So at the biggest moment, one of the youngest players and newest players in there showed up big and played really well. So I guess you can give a little bit of credit to the manager for making that kind of a switch, as you say, and it certainly worked out because it almost was a little bit anticlimactic once they got the lead in Game 7 that they were going to kind of win.
I was perfectly into my next point, which is the Arizona bullpen, which we kept. Well, I almost said you kept expecting to break down.
Yeah,
you were very down on them the entire time. They didn't bend at all.
I mean, did you really before the series think, well, you got to watch out for Kevin Ginkel?
No, but I don't know if that's just bias on my part.
And Ryan Thompson, who came over from the Rays, and any kind of Rays reliever you probably want to bring in and give him a try.
And obviously, you were not a big fan of Paul Sewell, though I think that's a bit left over from his.
I have Met angst on that, and the kind of parting words he had for the Mets that they didn't give him a chance. Where he didn't pitch as well for the Mets that he did for Seattle and then Arizona. Obviously,
out something when he went to Seattle, but he was dominant.
Yeah, you put him in the game as a closer and thinking this guy was shut down, locked down, everything that Aroldis Chapman and Craig Kimbrell wish they could have been in the playoffs.
And so I thought that was just interesting. And I think you've got Zach Gallen going Game 1 in the World Series for you if you're Arizona. You got to feel like you have a real good shot.
Well, and to get here, what they did, so the League Championship Series had, for the first time in Major League history, the away teams winning the final 2 games on the road. Both in the history of the LCS,
right?
The first
both
time
in the American and in the National League, the road team won the 2 final games.
And like the Phillies last year, the D-backs are a number 6 seed that made it to the World Series 2 years in a row. And all this stuff about the playoffs are broken and all that, I really think it's, you can't predict on the basis of records during the regular season. It is how the teams are playing at the time the playoffs start and continue. And the D-backs were playing well from Game 1 of the playoffs and haven't let up since.
Right, exactly.
Same thing with the Rangers.
Same thing with the Rangers. And I think other than a bit of a nightmare homestand for the Rangers against the Astros.
At the end of the year, yeah.
Well, in the playoffs. Even.
Well, yeah. Well,
they lost every game at home.
That's right. Right, of course.
Right. So outside of that, they played really well. The Diamondbacks, outside of those first 2 games, played really well. And I got to think getting that Ketel Marte game-winning hit, I think helped take if they don't win that game, it's a different series, obviously.
So in that Game 7, like the biggest moment that you think you saw in that game, what do you have it as? Because there was a moment that I watched that I thought, oh, this is it right now, and it didn't happen, and it kind of set the tone for the rest of the game.
Well, why don't you say what?
I will say in the 7th inning, right? They bring up with 2 guys on. You've got Trey Turner and you've got Bryce Harper coming up, and you bring in the pitcher Ginkel. And he gets them both to fly out with 2 guys on. They were the go-ahead run at the plate in the 7th inning.
And the Phillies never got the go-ahead run, the tying run to the plate the rest of the game.
Right, so he comes in the next inning, does Ginkel, and he strikes out the side.
Dominant.
He strikes out the side in the 8th, in that. That's crazy. And then Sewell comes in and gets them 1, 2, 3. They never. So Kyle Schwarber ends up in the on-deck circle, hoping that Jake Cave is going to get on and he'll have the chance to tie the game
with another
Schwarber. Never leaves the on-deck circle.
Well, I thought what was interesting, looking at what happened in that series, the Diamondback pitchers figured out a way to keep the ball in the park. The Phillies, I don't think, had any home runs in the last 2 games of that series.
They didn't.
And that team was so built around being able to
They had 11 homers in the series. Schwarber had 5. Right. They had none in the last 2 games. Alec Boehm hit a home run in Game 7. I'm sorry.
You're correct.
You're right,
but
you're right.
I think,
I'm sorry.
I think that looking at that, it's the one sort of drawback to having the one kind of drawback in my mind and having Kyle Schwarber be your leadoff guy is that if he's not hitting home runs, it puts so much pressure.
Guy hit 5. He batted .367. What do you want from him?
To show up in Game 6 and 7.
Yeah, well, the guy had already had a great playoff. So how much more do you want? It's Castellano that I think. Castellanos is the
vanished.
Guy, right? 1 for 24.
Bryce Harper vanished in Game 6 and 7, especially after. I mean, okay, this is something. So Bryce Harper showed up. Do you know what jersey he showed up in?
Yeah,
for Game 7.
Yeah, I did.
It was a 76er jersey,
I
which
saw it.
just right there, not a great pick. But whose 76er jersey was he wearing?
Iverson?
Patrick Beverly, which even worse decision, who is known for, who was kind of got a reputation for not showing up in playoff games.
That's interesting.
So to wear a Sixer jersey, who have choked away multiple postseasons recently, and it's a Pat Bev Sixer jersey, I mean, it was like bringing demons into the house.
Well, and it certainly didn't work out. And Schwarber, did all kinds of things early in the series where he's, I guess, tied with Albert Pujols for the most home runs in in LCS history with 11. But they just needed to get him to the plate in the ninth inning, and the guy couldn't even get a walk.
My comment isn't as much on Schwarber not performing or performing, because he did have an objectively very good LCS and LCS. But I think the problem is if in those games 6 and 7, when he's not getting on base, that puts so much pressure on Trey Turner in that lineup to get on base.
And Trey Turner didn't end up having a great late series there.
And there's a lot of, because if you're not getting guys on base, they're a team that they're going to hit solo home runs, or they're not. That's pretty much all they're going to do. And it dried up in those last two games, and I think that really hurt him.
And since we're nitpicking here, because we like to do that here in this podcast, I thought that leaving Kimbrel in to face Corbin Carroll in Game 4 instead of going to the lefty Alvarado was a big mistake, because they were 2-1 in games. They had to leave him in the game, and Alec Thomas homers.
Yeah.
And that changed the entire series, I think.
Right. And is that just Rob Thompson believing in his guy for one batter too many?
And that, of course, Kimbrel did get the pitch again, but he didn't pitch well, and he didn't pitch again in the last game at all. Exactly. It didn't get him up.
He got demoted. He's pretty much done he went from being their de facto closer to, well, maybe use him in the sixth over the course of a series.
So I thought that was a really, and it would have been such a great story right in Game 7, because Zach Wheeler, does the mad bum thing, and he comes in and to pitch late in the game to try to save them and to hold the score, except they didn't score any runs. They didn't win, so it means like nothing.
It was like just a footnote in the game that he came in.
But it was going to be this epic thing if they would have gotten the 5-4 lead and Zach Wheeler would have saved them.
I also think the fact that the Diamondbacks, you could feel it last night when the Diamondbacks scored in the first inning. It was like the air got taken out of the ballpark in Philadelphia. The fans were still there. They were still up.
I agree.
But it immediately...
It was only one run.
But it immediately undercut the frenzy that was building there.
Yeah, and the Philly fans were great through the series, as frustrated as they were. They stood for so much of that game, and they rooted their team on.
Oh, they were. That was an electric
I love
ballpark.
that. I really did.
And it's got to be painful for them watching the D-backs plant the flag.
No less painful, by the way, and we'll get to that in a second, than having the Astros, watch the Rangers win at their ballpark.
So before we get into that, I would say between the two series, this is painful for the Phillies, but they'll be able to recover from this. I think the loss that the Astros suffered is a lot harder to get over.
We'll get to that. I think the Phillies, is this the fifth worst loss in their history? I don't think so, actually, because everybody thought the Braves were the best team, and they vanquished the Braves again, and so they got all the way here.
I think that's what makes this loss to the Diamondbacks so much more painful, though, is because I think for a lot of Phillies fans,
Godzilla,
right? We beat Godzilla. Oh, we're gonna waltz into the World Series, and then you dominate games 1 and 2. So you're already thinking, oh yeah, we're going to the World
Series. And we have
Series.
the experience, and we've been there.
And I was saying, this feels like a 2015 Royals team. Where they were coming off of that heartbreaking loss the year before.
That's a good comparison, actually, because they were a bad team before that.
And they felt like a team on a mission, and then they went to the desert, and they kind of never recovered.
It just never came back for them. So when you talk about futility in the playoffs, I just want to mention that the Diamondbacks slashed a wonderful 236, 294, 348 with an ops of 642 in the 7-game series. They scored a grand total of 21 runs. They won the series.
Right. And that gets scary going into the World Series, because sometimes you can see they managed to win that one, and then that doesn't carry over to the next one, and they could. Now, I think they will play the Rangers tough. I am confident in that.
I think so, too.
But I think right now, I would say leaning towards the Rangers.
And I'll just say this about the Phillies. So the Phillies actually kind of out-hit them in this series, but that's all based upon statistically the 10-0 game in Game 2.
Right.
Which skews all the statistics to the runs scored and all that.
Everything looks weird.
Everything looks weird, like the Phillies, played them, and the Phillies had a better whip than that. Like all these numbers that you would have thought would have driven the result.
In a small sample size, that you can get some weird statistical stuff. enough. Like, you have to think, like, you see it in the NFL right now. When you see any of the offensive statistics, the Dolphins are totally screwing all of the averages because of that one game against the Broncos where they scored 70. So it's the same way here with the Philadelphia series, because there's that one game where they won 10-0 that distorts I bet it would look very differently if you removed that one game.
I think that's probably the way you should look at statistics, because those are anomalies. And the Diamondbacks, I thought, was really interesting. The Diamondbacks were outscored by 15 runs in the regular season this year. That is the first time in Major League history a team won the pennant with a negative run differential.
That's interesting. And I mean,
first time.
I think if you ultimately go, why did the Phillies lose and why did the Diamondbacks win? You got to look at this. In games 6 and 7 at home, Schwarber, Harper, Castellano, and Turner won a combined 1 for 28.
Yeah, that's it.
Your best 4 players didn't have a good...
It's killing them. I remember Roger Federer when he lost to, I think, Nadal at a major, and they asked him, and he's on the court going, this is killing me. That just killed the Phillies.
It's tough because it wasn't like the Diamondbacks went into the tree and they just played unbelievable baseball.
But they got big hits when they needed to, and the big outs when they needed to.
It's so much rougher when you feel like your best players didn't show up. That's going to eat away at those 4 guys in game 6.
Well, particularly, we were just rhapsodizing about Bryce Harper being Mr. Clutch and being, a good playoff performer. And in the 2 biggest games in his own ballpark,
he didn't show up.
And of course, he hit the ball really well in the first. Like he had almost. He had 108 mile an hour off the bat that went 330 feet, but was caught by Alec Thomas in the outfield. Yeah, like I hit it really good, but I hit it to the wrong place.
Right. And it's just, that's the way baseball is. That's baseball, Susan.
So exactly. And so the Diamondbacks have a lot to sort of bank on. They are the away team in the World Series. So the game 1 will be in Arlington on Friday night. But like you said, they got Zach Gallen going out there in game 1, and they have to like the momentum that they have gained going into this.
Right.
But then so do the Rangers.
Right, exactly. You've got another team that's, equally momentumed up, because you would have thought after Altuve hit that home run to win that game, there was no way the Rangers were winning.
They got
series.
off the mat, didn't they?
Right, and I remember going into Game 6 thinking, this feels like a game the Astros win. But if they don't win this game, Game 7 gets really
right. Because then you start thinking, maybe we really aren't good at home.
Right.
Maybe it's one of those weird things.
You have to look at that. The Astros were not good at home the entire year.
They were one of the. I don't know how many teams. I have the stats someplace. They had a losing record at home and made it to the championship series in their league.
Almost unheard of. And then they lose all 4 games at Minute Maid Park. That fan base has to just be.
It is the second time in Major League history that the road team has won every game in a best-of-7 series. It happened in the 2019 World Series. We know when the Nationals, won. The Astros actually lost that one too. And Adolis Garcia, I guess, is their daddy.
Right. I mean, I have to say that trade they made with the Cardinals in 2019 for Garcia looks like a genius trade.
Cardinals got to be going, oh.
How did we miss on that one?
Exactly. And it's not enough that they let Jordan Montgomery go, too.
Ex-Cardinals really helping out the Rangers. And I think what's interesting, if you look at the Rangers' performance, I mean, so much of what was talked about into this season was the addition of DeGrom, Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, trading for Max Scherzer. But, I mean, outside of Seager's home run, it wasn't those guys that was powering them to victory.
Seager was very good.
But it was Adolis Garcia.
Right.
It was Jonah Heim. It was Evan Carter. It was Nathaniel Lau. It was all of these guys, the young guys on that Ranger team that really drove them.
Even Josh Young at third base can contribute with some real big hits. So, and I guess I don't want to give the manager too much credit, because Bruce Bochy is like, they're going to make a statue of this guy someplace, And I like Bochy. I have no issues with him. But I feel like, the manager can do so much, but it is amazing, that he has been 7-0 in final games, 6-0 in final games, and Dusty Baker is 0-7.
Right, and Dusty Baker is now retired.
Right. That was enough to tell Dusty, I'm done with this stuff. I had enough of this. I'm out.
Right, and I think from what I was seeing, Astro fans are very grateful for the time he came in there. He came in and helped them stabilize at a very difficult time.
Kind of took the job when you're going to have a hard time getting somebody to take the job at that time.
And he did and I'm really glad for Dusty that he got his World Series last year. I feel like that makes it a lot easier for him to retire. But I think there was also a sentiment of, we're okay with moving on from Dusty Baker, from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think that's he's 74 years old. I think
the guys that are celebrating the most are named Yandy Diaz and Chase McCormick.
Oh, I don't know why you say that.
Well, both of those guys were statistically much better than their counterparts this season, but he really liked trotting out Martin Maldonado.
So you're going with the old guys playing hunches kind of thing.
Well, somebody raised a point that Dusty was a guy that when he came up, he was playing behind Felipe Alou and Hank Aaron. And he had to sit behind Hank Aaron for 4 years, even though Dusty was putting up more WAR than Hank, and he only became a full-time player when Hank Aaron moved to first base. So his reluctance to put in young guys is something that's even kind of born out of his own career.
I still think if you ask Dusty going, look, in every universe there is, I'm always playing behind Hank Aaron.
Right. But I can understand how you view it as, no, this is the way it's supposed to go. It's the veteran's position.
Yeah, I get that. That's sort of like a boomerish kind of a,
It's an old baseball kind of thing.
You got to pay your dues.
Right. And that's what Dusty had to pay his dues. So I could see him, that's just not necessarily that he's an old guy that's out of touch. That's just the way he looks at it.
So do you think we're going to have the anomaly of home teams losing games or winning games in this series, or is that just a freak occurrence?
I think that's a freak occurrence.
I kind of feel the same.
Obviously, that's all anybody's going to talk about if the D-backs win game one.
Right. And I was surprised because I would have thought in the history of baseball that the home teams had won more than 3 World Series so they won every home game, all 4 games at home, and lost 3 games on the road. And so that's only happened in 1987 and 1991 with the Minnesota Twins both times in the Homer Dome, which is kind of weird.
Suspicious.
And then 2001 with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They won all 4 games at home.
Surprising, just because I think it's kind of
against the Yankees.
You're not going to see because especially with the World Series used to being a 2-3-2 split, I think that made it harder to see those kinds of win the first 2 games.
It is a 2-3-2.
Right, it's not anymore.
It is.
I thought it was 2-2-1-1.
No, I was going to advocate. You took my next point. I was going to advocate going, I don't like 2-3-2. I like the going back and forth because I think it doesn't give the 3 games at home is
very useful.
It's a cool thing. You got to win one game on the road.
2-2-1-1-1.
I agree. That's not the way they do it, and they actually will play 2-3-2.
Why they don't do it, because it would add in a lot of extra dead time to the World Series.
Right. And you're already playing into the first week of November, so I don't think you can change and go back into what that is. So and of course the World Series is going to have the benefit this year of having them play in both Arlington and Arizona. So in Arlington there's a roof. Not that it's going to get cold there anyway.
It's not going to get cold.
It ain't going to get cold in Arizona, so you have no weather issues.
This is the first World Series to ever feature 2 teams named for their state, not for their city.
And it's okay, and it's only the 3rd time that 2 true since the area of expansion in 1961 that 2 expansion teams after have played for the team. The 3rd time. The first was the Mets in 2015
against the Royals.
Those were 2 expansion teams in 1969. And I'll think of the other one in a second. And so this is another one. And so that's pretty unusual that the Astros
played the Braves.
Played not the Braves. No. The Astros played.
The Nationals?
The Astros played the National. No, they were, because they were the Expos.
Yeah.
So the Astros Nationals was the other one. Very good. So those are the only 2 times that expansion teams got all the way to play each other in the World Series. And you got to feel for the teams that have never, gotten to the World Series at all, like the Seattle Mariners.
And you're either going to see a team win their first World Series in the Rangers this year, or your team get their first one in 20-something years with the Diamondbacks. So it'll be fun. And I think for baseball, you're going to have 9 different World Series winners in 10 years.
I think that's a good thing.
That's a great thing. And you had 2 teams that lost 100 games 2 years ago, and they're right back in the World Series now. And for a sport that was always sort of plagued by teams having these endlessly long rebuilds where it's just like, oh, okay, my team's going to now lose 100 games for the next 4 seasons as they dig themselves out of this. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Unless you're the A's, of course.
Well, so, that feels like more of an intentional choice on the ownership
and so does that give teams like the Royals and the Rockies hope that they could turn this around quickly?
That you could go, okay, you know what? If we make it, and you don't have to do it, you have 2 teams that did it in different ways. You have a team that did it by building up through smart, cost-effective moves and bringing up through their farm system. You have another team that relied on their farm system too, but through a lot of big-name free agent signings. So it doesn't matter that, it's not like, oh, yeah, you had the Mets playing, some other team that spent an ungodly amount of money this year in the AL, and those two teams meet in the World Series. Where their takeaway from that is you spend the most, you get the furthest.
So they don't play each other often. The two teams in the World Series, they played 4 times this year. They played once in May and once in August. 2-game series.
Weird.
In each place. They split everything. So you would learn nothing from that.
Right.
And so the favorite is pretty clear, you would say, right?
I think I personally
I know what the betting line favorite is.
Right. I would say the favorite to me is the Rangers.
It is the Rangers, and so they are
on name talent. I'd say people are probably predicting 4-2.
They're minus 174, which is a pretty prohibitive favorite right now, and so that means that to win $100, you have to bet $174.
Right, and if you bet $100 on the
no, the Diamondbacks are plus 148. So if you bet $100, you get $148.
That's pretty good.
So that's why the bettors have to go. Gee, I'm not sure. Both of them seem like pretty good deals. Well, that's the point of a betting line.
That's a good betting line
to make it so. I think the clear favorite are the Rangers, and they just have a way of hit. I just feel like their hitting is going to come through in the World Series, that I can rely on their ability to hit in the clutch a little bit more than I can rely on the Diamondbacks.
But didn't we say the same thing about the Phillies?
Doubted the Diamondbacks all darn year. I'm going to pay for this again, aren't I?
Right. I mean, I'm going to pay for it too because I think we're both saying we think the Rangers are going to win the World Series.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's not because I think their pitching is dominant, because I don't think that it is.
No.
But I don't think the Diamondbacks pitching is dominant either.
And I think the Rangers pitching is enough to get them there. And so unless you get another series out of Merrill Kelly and Brandon Pfaadt pitching like they did in the LCS, I think I would take the Ranger lineup any day over the Diamondback
100%
lineup.
Agree with that. Yes, yeah.
So I think that's what makes it really hard for me to pick against the Rangers here.
The Diamondbacks are still, to me, the little team that could.
Right. and we've seen, what this World Series kind of gives me the vibes of that I worry about? The 2007 World Series, Rocktober. You had the fiery Rockies coming out of the National League in a feel-good story to just get their teeth kicked in by the Red Sox in the World Series.
That was a sweep.
That was a dominant sweep.
Yeah. And the Red
I
Sox,
hope we don't get that.
No, I don't think that we will, but I think that for our podcast, so we drop an episode on Mondays normally, and of course we're only going to have had 2 games in the World Series, so I don't know what the heck we're going to talk about in this week in baseball. We're going to talk about games 1 and 2.
There's some other stuff that's been going on. Bob Melvin was hired as the manager of the Giants.
Well, don't tease it out now. We'll use that next week for This Week in Baseball.
Yeah, I know.
So anyway, enjoy the World Series. We know we're going to. And thanks for I wanted to say one more thing. We got a nice note from one of our listeners today, making suggestions for an episode that I think we're going to take on.
Oh yeah, exactly. It was
Martin
a really
Connolly,
cool idea.
thank you for writing to us and talking about that. So we won't tease that out right now. We'll just do the episode. Yeah. So keep asking us, because we actually do read these things and we'll hear you guys.
Yeah, and enjoy the Fall Classic.